Welcome to Shareholder Primacy from Free Float Media, a podcast about activist investing, securities law, and all the ways the financial and legal rules intersect and collide in real life. Hey, Matt, how are you?
I am lovely, Mike. I am not Ann Lipton.
You are not Ann Lipton. I'm here today with Matt Moscardi, who is the proprietor of Free Float Analytics, along with Damien, and the inestimable producer and director for Shareholder Primacy for our show here. So, yeah, that's Matt.
I prefer the title estimable. Of course, that's Mike Levin, an activist investor who lives and works in Chicago. He usually talks about stuff with Ann Lipton, who's the august law professor at the University of Colorado. But she started a new semester. She's meeting the students. I'm sure she's getting the flu, shaking everybody's hand. So I am sitting here filling in for a very special Shareholder Primacy episode.
For a mailbag episode.
That's right.
We have accumulated a number. Finally, people listen to us. Accumulated a number of interesting questions and inquiries and complaints and concerns. So we thought we would address some of them today. Just as a reminder, if you'd like to add to our pile of mailbag inquiries, please email us at shareholderprimacy, one word, at freefloat.llc. Once again, shareholderprimacy at freefloat.llc. Please send us your emails and we will handle them on a show at some point. So
you would be shocked to know that Mike and Ann do read every question that comes in. Every single one.
And we get a few. We look at them, we talk about them, and so we debate them. It's great.
All right,
and
so
we have some here that we'd like to cover. So
yeah,
go
so
ahead.
I'll be the questioner. I'll play the role of question, and Mike's
Yes.
going to answer all your questions in the absence of Ann. And I may interject sub questions if I don't understand something. But let's go. Let's start with this one. Ready? This one's from listener Michael, which I assume is not you.
No, correct. I didn't set this one up. No.
You didn't send this to yourself.
Right.
The question is, why do activists request the no-bo list to solicit votes? What does it enable that you can't do with public data like 13F filing? So 2 questions here. Like the no-bo list, what is it? Just give a quick what that is. And then what do you do with it? Why that?
Right.
Yeah, why that?
All right. Okay. NOBO stands for non-objecting beneficial owner. So let's take that apart. A beneficial owner is one who owns their shares through a custodian, through a broker. So you might own your shares at Schwab or Fidelity, or an institution might own them through a prime broker like Morgan Stanley or something. Okay. So basically, you don't own the shares in what's known as record name, but you own them through this custodian, and you're the beneficiary. You benefit from their owning it. All right. It's economically, it's all the same thing. It's just legally, it's a distinction. So a beneficial owner is that. If you and the custodian knows who you are, but the company that you own the shares in does not.
Got it.
So when you register for an account, in all the paperwork, one of the questions that custodian or that broker is going to ask you is, do you object to our sharing your contact information with the company, with the company whose shares you're buying? And almost everybody says no. I mean, the default is no. Okay, you don't object. All right, so you become, at that point, a non-objecting beneficial owner. All right?
And that contrast, you talk about record.
Yes.
You know, like, so does that contrast with record owners just for edification?
Yeah, record owners don't own them through a custodian. This is not, I mean, so you can take, you can own your shares directly with the custodian, with the transfer agent for the company.
Right.
Okay? And that becomes important at some point if you want to nominate directors and so forth. We talk about that another time. But companies use that record ownership as a way to understand directly who the shareholders are. But again, when they pull up a list of who their shareholders are, a company, it'll show on the record list, a lot of shares at Schwab, a lot of shares at Fidelity, at all the brokers. But they don't know who the individual shareholders are because that's who the record owner is. But if you're a NOBO, if you did not object, the company can go ask for a list of those NOBOs. I'll talk about that in a minute. So this is in contrast to OBOs, objecting beneficial owners, and relatively few shareholders know when they're kind of signing up for an account or whatever to object. It really isn't, those are people who are really interested in privacy or don't want to get bugged by the company for some reason, okay? But almost everybody's a NOBO. Okay, I know in my holdings I'm a NOBO. I never, and I hold my shares at Morgan Stanley, is where my brokerage account is, and I get communication from Morgan Stanley from companies. All right, so the thing about a NOBO list, which is what Michael is asking about, is it's a detailed list of who your specific shareholders are. All right. Individuals and institutions. It lists your contact information, doesn't list your phone number, or sometimes it does. Doesn't list your email address, but you can sort of back into contact information. List your mailing address, whatever contact information the broker has for you, they can send it to the company. And they also list the number of shares that you own. So that it's one of the basic tools of activism, okay, is to get a copy of the NOBO list from the company and use that to start to figure out who the shareholders are and start to talk to them and start to make your case to them. So the NOBO list is actually quite valuable. So that's why activists request it, so we can have personal one-on-one conversations with big shareholders based on that list. I'll make another comment about that in a minute, but to answer the second part of the question is that it's much better than like 13F data, which is basically the filings that funds do to show their holdings, in part because you get so many more, different shareholders that are on a NOBO list that don't necessarily file 13Fs. Okay, so it provides a whole lot more better information about what the shareholder base is. Okay, so I'll make one other comment about about getting the NOBO list, which seems a little mysterious, but is actually quite straightforward. Okay, you can get the NOBO list from the company. You just have to request it. It's part of a books and records demand in Delaware corporations. That's a Section 220 demand. And so whenever I request a list of shareholders as part of, the basic activism work, I request the record list, which doesn't tell you much, as we talked about, but I also request the NOBO list. Now, the company may or may not have the NOBO list. That's what's so interesting about this, is that companies will sometimes request it, sometimes they won't. They may have an old one. Okay, but companies don't, routinely, or some companies don't routinely get a copy of the NOBO list, or maybe they'll get it for the last shareholder meeting, so they'll have a NOBO list as the record date from, 2024, 2025 or something like that. So, and if you do a books and records demand, you can't require a company to get something they don't already have. So they have to have the NOBO list. So sometimes you'll request the NOBO list from a company and they'll say, I don't have it. Or I don't have a current one. And then what your next move is you call Broadridge. And there's contact information for Broadridge. You could do this from Median too, but Broadridge is a little easier to work with, and they cover a lot more of the shareholders, real estate. And Broadridge will tell you the last NOBO list that they sent to a company. Because Broadridge is the custodian. They're the ones who have these NOBO lists. And, if a company is in the middle of a really hot solicitation or something like that, it'll get a copy. Sometimes they'll get NOBO lists several times. These cost money. These cost the company money to get one. So you can ask Broadridge, when's the last NOBO list that, I got for Microsoft or whatever the company, and they'll tell you. And then you go back to the company and say, oh, I know that the last NOBO list you got was 6 months ago. Just send me that one. And then you have some really valuable information to work with.
So question,
go ahead, yeah.
Doesn't if the NOBO list costs the company money to get,
yes,
wouldn't the company want to charge you if you're asking them for it?
They'd like to, and sometimes they claim to. They'll say, oh, I'm going to make you pay the cost of getting it. But if they already have this information, which by definition they do here, they can only charge you like the cost of copying it. So if the Nobo list cost them $5,000 or $6,000, they really can't charge you the cost of obtaining it. They can just try to charge you the cost of reproducing it, which is usually a fraction of that. So, and I've been involved in situations where companies have said, yeah, you got to pay me for the whole thing. And I say, no, that's not how this works.
A copy is like 75 cents, I think. That's
well, you think, but, or electronic copy. You know, a Nobo list is just a big spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So it's great. So anyway, so that's Nobo lists, and I get them all the time, and they're fun reading. It's really interesting to kind of look at and say, oh, that guy's a shareholder. Oh my God, I thought he sold his shares, or the CEO owns that many shares, or whatever. So
only Mike Levin would say a Nobo list is fun reading.
Absolutely,
that's where that's
right.
All right, I got another question for you.
All right,
I got another question for you. This one's from a listener named Carl, who asks, what's your best guess for the conditions under which an activist gets involved at Berkshire Hathaway and Bill Ackman and Howard Hughes Holdings? Which I don't know the second one, but this is basically just, what would it have to look like for Berkshire to get an activist or Howard Hughes to get an activist?
Howard Hughes. Okay, I'll go to Howard Hughes and Ackman in a second. One of these is really interesting, which is of course Berkshire. And it's funny because I've wondered this for years. I don't own Berkshire shares. I have in the past. I don't now. Berkshire has some of the attributes of a classic subject for an activist. Okay, it's a huge conglomerate with a bunch of barely related businesses with immense just rivers of cash, and and it has some of the characteristics. Some businesses are performing well, some aren't, some are better than others. So it would be a classic company for an activist to try to do something with. But of course, as is well known, there's a couple of exceptions to this. First, it's characterized by just the most patient investors in the world, who of course love the now former CEO. But there's also a lot of insider control. And
like kids.
An activist project would run up against that insider control and obviously kind of fail. But that was one of the first things, is that, and Warren Buffett's cultivated this for years. It's just very patient capital. And, any activist that says, hey, we need to get some of this cash back or something, would run into a management that very credibly says, no, just, we don't want this. It's very patient. Okay. The other interesting attribute of how Berkshire kind of built itself, and again, I'm glossing over just immense amounts of study and research that has been done in the company, is that in my estimation, Berkshire has thrived on essentially an ability to kind of underpay for its deals. Okay. Berkshire is, of course, a very credible counterparty. Their checks clear, or whatever. So it's a place that people go when they really need to get a deal done, and they don't mind, getting a little screwed in the process, because then you become, part of the Berkshire family and that kind of halo. So, they underpay for these deals, and then they hold them forever because of this patient capital. Okay. So that's sort of how this conglomerate looks. Again, forgetting the financial analysis that goes into it and so forth, but that's kind of, in my view, kind of how Berkshire works. Now,
but in the end, it doesn't really matter because it is dual class, right? Like it's
right, exactly, right.
So, I mean, as an activist, you must be looking first and foremost is, can I actually do something at the company?
Right. Oh, absolutely. Well, but there's other that's kind of my flash, but there's other activists that just try to try to put some pressure on to sort of see what'll happen. Okay. And that may happen here. The change in leadership, along with just this, I think their cash holdings are somewhere in the range of $350 billion right now. I mean, it's the most cash they've ever had. And at some point, I got to think that the pressure on the company to do something with this cash is going to start to build up. That now that, to his credit, Warren Buffett's done everything he can to try to smooth the path for Greg Abel to be the CEO and to sort of say, hey, we're going to still be patient and so forth. But I got to think that there's going to be sort of a different kind or different level of pressure on the company to do something with its balance sheet now that Buffett is no longer CEO. Now he's still on the board. He's still board. He's still active in the company, of course. Even at 90, I think 96, or going to be 96. So he's, going to be there to kind of defend this philosophy. But it'd be really interesting to see how they deal with, conventional pressure to do something with cash that, other companies deal with all the time. Now that they've had this kind of management transition. So that's one answer to the question about the conditions, that there was this management change that, combined with the cash and the fact that it's still a big conglomerate, that may lead to some pressure. Again, it's not necessarily going to be successful pressure, but there may be more voice for that. Let's talk for a minute now about Ackman and Howard Hughes. So Bill Ackman is obviously Bill Ackman, activist investor, has all sorts of investment vehicles. One of them, though it's not literally his own vehicle, is Howard Hughes Holdings, which is a publicly held, basically a real estate company. And he's the board chair. And it's sort of an odd kind of company. It's thought that Ackman's kind of holding it as a vehicle for maybe potential activism at some point. Unlikely that this will be the target, even though the business has, uneven performance and so forth. He controls almost 50% of the voting shares. So activism here would be unlikely, and if it was some sort of really, real disaster at the company. And right now, like I said, it's mostly a vehicle, potential vehicle for him to do stuff with. So
unless of course someone just doesn't like Ackman, right? Like in which case,
he's got plenty of enemies.
He's got. Yeah. He's doing all sorts of crazy stuff. He's spouting off in the press about all manner of things. If somebody doesn't like what he has to say, has some money, then they may decide to go after.
That's actually a very good point. Someone may decide to go after Howard Hughes for like not
financial reasons, basically to stick it to Ackman,
just to make life hard for him. Yeah. Right. So anyway, so those two. That's a great question from Carl particularly about Berkshire. I've always kind of wondered what insulates Berkshire from activist pressure other than the cult of personality.
Yeah, right. That's kind of it, right? You could say the same thing about Tesla, right? Like, which it wasn't Carl's question, but Tesla, is a increasingly underperforming company that is in constant need of cash. It's getting pushed out of markets. It's the deregulatory press has heard it, and they have a mercurial,
leadership, right? Exactly.
So who's got 5 jobs? I'd actually forget Berkshire. Tesla seems like more of an activist play, and yet the cult of personality. I think
because and again the insider control and that's a problem at Berkshire too. That there's enough votes in Buffett's hands.
Right.
That most activism will likely fail, but there could be some pressure, because unlike Tesla, Berkshire cares about its kind of public reputation, and so if the pressure kind of mounts, they may say, okay, well, again, they bent into some pressure, created a second class of shares that were a little lower priced and so forth. So they've done some things to kind of nod towards shareholders, and they may have to do more of that. In the coming years. So we'll see. I don't know. Anyway, so those are 2 good questions. We got some others lined up we'd like to talk about. So why don't we do that in a minute, okay, Matt? And we'll all right, cool. We'll come back and talk about other stuff here at Shareholder Primacy.
Shareholder Primacy is brought to you by FreeFloatAnalytics.com, the only free database of corporate directors, their influence, and their performance. If you own a stock or retirement plan, go to FreeFloatAnalytics.com and look up which of your elected directors are performing well and which aren't. Use your vote in the alternative democracy and get your data at FreeFloatAnalytics.com. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Shareholder Primacy. I'm Matt Moscardi, and we are mailbagging. So let's continue mailbagging. Here is another question, Mike, from listener Rebecca.
Okay, go ahead.
Who asks, how does an activist investor handle Edgar filings? Can you just do it yourself, or do you need a law firm to do it? I am guessing Rebecca, based on this question, might be a lawyer looking for some big clients. So
I happen to know it's an investor type of person.
So can you do it yourself, or do you need a law firm to do it?
Okay, Edgar is really kind of interesting. I do some of my own Edgar work, Edgar filings. It's not as mysterious as it's a hassle in some ways, but it's sometimes even more expensive hassle to have like a law firm or other firms do it for you. So it kind of depends on the filing. You absolutely can do some of it yourself. There's no reason not to. Let me separate out, if you're involved in a proxy contest and you're doing a lot of like proxy statements and so forth, you're going to want to have an attorney help you not only write the filings, but also probably file them. Okay. You'll need legal input as to, how to comply with various parts of the proxy rules. What you need to say about a nominee, what you need to say about the shareholder, what the timing looks like under universal proxy. There's all sorts of legal intricacies where you're going to want the legal input about how to actually do the drafting. Okay. But that's for, like I said, proxy statements. Okay, for preliminary proxy statements and the real ones and then revised ones. Okay. For a lot of other filings, you absolutely can do some of the drafting yourself, and you totally can do some of the filing, the actual working on Edgar yourself without an attorney. First thing you need is an account. You need to go to Edgar Filer Management. There's a drop down on the SEC website for that. And you go get login credentials. It's really easy. Anybody in the U.S. can do it. And you also have to sign up for an Edgar ID if you don't already have that. But most people here who are listening, or investors who want to do this kind of stuff, probably already have an Edgar ID know that you'll need one. This is the unique identifier that allows you to be file any kind of SEC filing. I have an Edgar ID. I've had it for years. And to get it, you got to submit a bunch of paperwork. Got to apply for it, basically. And Edgar can take, I don't know I haven't done it lately. I'm wondering whether the SEC now has a bit of delay because of all the shutdown stuff and the lack of people. But it used to take like a week to get an Edgar ID. But along with that and login credentials, you can do some of your own filings. So let's talk about some of the others. The most straightforward, actually, are 13D filings for when you have an activist intent and you're over 5%, and 13G when you don't have activist intent, but you have to file over 5. You have over 5%. So those initial filings or amendments are really straightforward. The SEC actually has a form that you fill out that allows you to put all the information in. And for 13D, the key part is item 4. You got to write that kind of well. But I've actually had some success copying others for some of the boilerplate. And you can write all that yourself. And then you can just, with your Edgar ID and your login credentials, you can file a D. Now, again, if there's any kind of doubt, again, not a lawyer here, not giving legal advice. I'm just telling that it's possible, if you're comfortable doing this, to file Ds and Gs on your own. Similarly, Form 3 and 4, which is your holding if you're an insider, are also pretty easy to file. But in most cases, a company, because you're disclosing shares in a company where you already own shares, the company usually kind of handles that for you. The form can be a little deceptive, but again, the filing is pretty straightforward on Edgar. The one that I'll talk about that gets a little harder is what's called the technical term is DFAN 14A. It's basically supplemental proxy material. So if you're soliciting proxies and you're not actually doing the proxy statement, but you want to disclose a news release or a change to the website or some social media, those all go in this DFAN 14A. And that's something that, again, you can do yourself. There's a different part of the Edgar submission website you have to go to, so it's not a form. You're submitting, some sort of free form, basically a PDF type file. And the formatting gets a little weird and a little tricky. But again, you can do the submission yourself through an Edgar account. And so as long as you've, gotten the legal input, and again, if there's any doubt, consult your favorite securities attorney. you can
Rebecca.
do this kind of
Consult Rebecca.
Right?
Yeah.
You're right. Maybe, like I said, do this all yourself. On your own and basically save some money and have a little control over the process. But I'd caution you as soon as it starts getting a little more complicated about what needs to go into a proxy filing or whether you need to file a 13D, you might want to call a securities attorney to get a little input on that. But other than that, the actual navigating the Edgar submission system takes a little bit of practice, but it's totally doable. You can kind of do it yourself. So,
I'll ask a follow-up. Like, how does AI ruin this for everybody who hires a lawyer to do it?
It ruins it a lot because there are people who have used, I don't know, ChatGPT or used other AI engines to draft SEC filings and gotten totally wrecked. The citations are wrong, stuff's off. This is something where you might be able to ask your favorite AI tool to write a section of it or write a draft of the background to a solicitation and a proxy statement or something like that, but you're going to have to work on it because the SEC is sufficiently vigilant about this stuff that they're going to find problems. Now, again, most of the time the worst that happens if you screw this up, you just have to refile it and you may lose some time or conceivably you could miss a deadline. But using AI to do this stuff is a little risky. So I might ask it for input to parts of it, but I wouldn't ask it to write this stuff. And hopefully all my securities lawyers friends are comfortable that I said that now.
They're probably happy that you said
They're
that.
very happy.
Still get a lawyer, people. Still get a lawyer.
Yes, exactly. Still might want to talk to a lawyer before you do this, fully. So anyway, yeah.
All right, we want to do one more. Let's do one more.
Sure,
question.
let's do one more question.
All right, so this one is from Matt, and it's not me. It's not me. Honestly,
Okay.
It's a little suspicious that there was a Michael and a Matt. It sounds like we're just talking to ourselves. This one's not me. I don't know who this is.
Okay, good, great, no problem.
All right, the question is, what exactly do proxy solicitors do? Why does an activist or a company need one? Why does anybody need a proxy solicitor?
Okay, let me explain. It's pretty clear in activist worlds, if you're an activist, why you need the lawyer. We've talked about that. Okay. Frequently, we'll talk about, not as often as they like, activists will hire an investment banker, usually to do valuations and to help with strategy, even hiring public relations firms to help write news releases or help shape the messaging that's going to, help with shareholders. But the proxy solicitor is always a little confusing, at least to people that are new to this. So let me try to explain what they do because they're really critical at very important stages of an activist project. Okay? When you're trying to interact directly with shareholders, actually talk to them and then get them to vote for you in various ways, it really helps to have this proxy solicitor, a really good one working with you. Okay? What they do is two or threefold. First, they bring an intimate knowledge of a company's shareholder base to the activist. Okay, we talked about this a little while ago. You can get lists of shareholders, okay, but you're not necessarily going to know who to call at some hedge fund or at BlackRock or someone to sort of pitch your project, okay? You're not necessarily going to know kind of how they think or how they voted in the past, okay? So a good proxy solicitor really understands that whole landscape of which shareholders are thinking in what ways, okay? Relatedly, they will also be up to speed about shareholder voting policies. So all the big funds that you want to talk to generally have, stewardship departments that have voting policies. Well, you could go read all those, or you could rely on a proxy solicitor that's kind of already interpreted all that for you. So you'll know whether Fidelity, has a more or less of an inclination to support your thesis for a company. Okay, so they just have this really good knowledge of more what institutional shareholders are thinking. Okay, they don't, have this large database of individual shareholders. That would be a little much. Okay, so they kind of bring that to the table. The second thing that they can help with is trying to understand and plan to how to solicit those. Okay, this is sort of a cousin of the first understanding the shareholders. But if you're going to say, okay, I want to solicit 80% of the shares because I think that's going to be cost effective, or I want to know how to get to all the retail shareholders, they will kind of help plan and budget for and know the best ways to actually reach various kinds of shareholders. They'll know how to, get in touch with State Street and what their stewardship team kind of wants out of meetings, or a bunch of other institutional shareholders. They'll just be able to help kind of plan the approach to trying to persuade these shareholders that you're right and the company's wrong. Okay, so that's the second. So there's this whole planning exercise that they can help with. Then the third part is the actual processing of proxies. This is an enormous, administratively rich hassle, okay? Trying to actually collect and understand all the systems and how stuff works with Broadridge and Mediant and so forth, and chasing after all these people to actually get them to vote takes a lot of doing. And really good proxy solicitors have all sorts of tricks up their sleeve about how to reach out to all these shareholders. And this is individuals and institutions. They're really good at bird dogging this stuff, at helping people complete the paperwork. They have call centers that follow up on these shareholders. And so that's kind of the third part, is they actually can handle a lot of the, as I said, administratively rich process of actually compiling all this information and then going to a shareholder meeting, if you get that far, and presenting all the votes and taking a big stack of proxies and giving to the company and saying, here's how we won. Okay, so there's those three kind of stages, and it's a little weird, and they're not needed all the time, but understanding the shareholder base, planning how that part of the activist project kind of unfolds, and then finally actually executing on the collection and compilation and sorting out of all the votes is something that's really critical. There's other things that proxy solicitors do. They serve companies by doing shareholder surveillance. Really good ones help with the strategizing at the early stages of a proxy contest. So it doesn't hurt to involve a proxy solicitor when you're just starting to think about this stuff. So there's other things that they'll help do, but those three main stages are where I think they're really essential to a good activist project. Hopefully that helps, Matt. Whoever.
I mean, they sound like matchmakers. They sound like
a little bit, yeah.
I mean,
That's
they're
exactly
like
right.
telling you like, oh, you have a great little thesis that I'm sure so and so would love, and they love to talk
Right.
about this. You guys should just get together and hang out.
Exactly. So they can kind of because they're in touch with a lot of these shareholders very frequently during the year, where an activist sometimes only once every 2-3 years needs to go reach out to shareholders. So they really bring that kind of experience and that knowledge of what will resonate, what will make sense to one or another shareholder. So yeah, having a good one on your side of the table. And there's a couple that specialize in working with activists. InvestorCom, also Okapi and Saratoga tend to do a lot of work with activists. So they kind of understand a little more about the investors. They also, all the solicitors work with activists.
I know.
They'll all, yeah, go ahead.
I know the Georgeson people. They ask me for data because
Georgeson,
they're
work
working with activists all the time.
Right, and they also, they also like working with companies as well.
Yes.
That's a lot steadier work.
Which
but they,
honestly, isn't that good? Like, because you kind of know all ends of everyone.
Right,
Like,
you
you're
understand
just
exactly.
Yeah,
but
it's ecosystem.
Having a solicitor that really understands kind of what's driving an activist and kind of what motivates them, and is willing to be a little flexible, like in charging fees. That often helps me at least. So there's some activists that I know that again prefer some of the ones that have a little more of a specialty in working for dissidents, as we say. So yeah, so that's proxy solicitors. There's a really interesting community of people and really kind of help in some very important ways. All right.
I think it's probably enough. That's enough mailbagging for today.
Oh, fine, great.
But I do think if there are other questions that people should reach out. Mike gave it at
Let's
the top,
do
but
that.
it's shareholder primacy at freefloat.llc. Send it to the mail box, and we'll mailbag you when we get
when we get there.
questions.
Absolutely, I love it. So let's wrap up. We can hopefully get Ann back on here next week and then talk about something else. Okay. This is Shareholder Primacy, hosted by Ann Lipton and me, but this week hosted by Matt Moscardi and me. I'm an independent activist investor and advisor to investors about their activist situations. Matt, of course, is the founder of Free Float Analytics and also the producer and director of our show here. And just to remind people who she is professor of law and Lawrence W. Demuth Chair of Business Law at the University of Colorado Law School. You can find me, Mike, at theactivistinvestor.com, and you can find Matt at freefloat.llc. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again soon.